call this the Great Northwest Rat Mischief. Strange things happen on the internet. And oddly enough, there's a subculture of knife enthusiasts or knife nuts or whatever you would care to call them on forums and whatnot. And I hesitatingly started posting, and they do this thing called knife porn, which is where you take your gorgeous knife and you put it in some beautiful setting. And then people comment, and it's just a strange thing. And people started, first one guy said, "Oh, I recognize that area." And it's like, well, next time you're out here, we get together and play with knives. And then it kind of kept happening until we got to where we do this sort of Sunday trees and quiet thing. And we gather where I work at the Emergency Operations Center at noon on Sundays, and we would head out into the woods and just do whatever. And it typically involved knives and campfires and coffee and people telling stories and outright lies and just kind of hanging out without adult supervision or any kind of agenda. And then at some point, somebody had the brilliant idea that, well, why don't we do a camp out? And so we decided, well, let's do a camp out. So we did. That was, I think, 13 or 14 years ago. And someone came up with, if you've got a group of cows, it's a herd. If you've got a group of doves, it's a covey. If you have a group of crows, it's a murder. Turns out if you have a group of rats, it's a rat mischief. And since a lot of these knives were swamp rat knives, we thought, well, how appropriate is that? We'll have the Great Northwest Rat Mischief. And so that's been going on for a number of years, and we've been constructing Barney rubble furniture out of rocks, and we just annually gather here and enjoy each other's company and hope we don't die.
What is a good reason for somebody to get into knives or be interested in knives?
God, there's so many good reasons. One, a quality tool, whether it's a knife, a saw, a truck, a camera, quality tools serve you better. Understanding what makes a quality knife will lead you to having better knives. And there's so many aspects to what makes a better knife. For me, like I described earlier, I like the cutting edge to be sharp. If there's a striker area, that should be sharp, but not anywhere that touches my hand. That's something that I learned by using knives. There's a lot of internet stuff, some right, some wrong, some in between, but really it's hard to listen to somebody else's opinion and say, that's the knife for me. You got to put it in your hand. You got to get outside, even if it's in your own backyard, chop stuff up, cut stuff up, put these things to use in your own kitchen, and you'll see quickly the differences between the hype knives, which can be fun too, and the ones that are real working knives. And when you've got a really good knife in your hand, especially in an outdoor setting like here at the Mischief, and it's pleasing to use. You'll hand it to your friends, like, hey, can I see your knife? You hand it off to them. They put it in their hand and they realize they have a real tool. It's not a toy. It just fits, And then when you go to cut with a good sharp knife, it's fun. That little snick of the cut versus, somebody sawing. We watch the action movies and they're trying to cut through webbing, and guys like myself and John and Don here, we're all like, why is that guy taking so long? Because, like, if he took care of his gear, end of story, movie's over, the heroine got saved, And it's just good tools. It's so hard to define, but you know it when you know it. You know when you're holding a well-designed tool that's going to serve you. And these are things that, in my mind, they hold history. years from now, somebody's going to pick this up, and even if they don't know who carried it, they're going to look at that and they can tell it's well put together, it serves a purpose, and somebody took care of it and utilized it almost daily, and that puts some importance on the knife. You know, it's like one of the things that my mentor Jim Schmidt had in his catalog, and I'm gonna kill the quote, but sometimes value of something is defined by how much care you have for it. And with knives, you can tell, is this somebody who just bought something and they don't know how to sharpen it? You pick it up, it's still a sharp tool. It's like, okay, they know something. That tells you something about the owner of that knife. It tells you something about the quality of the tool itself. And you know, it's just that transfer of knowledge through things that it's hard to say, or hard for me to define, but you know it when you pick one up. Whether it's one of mine or somebody else's, a good tool just feels at home in the hand. I have no real idea how I got into knives. I made my first real knife out of steel when I was about 8 years old. I'm now 48, and grew up. My dad worked on a sawmill, or owned a sawmill. We worked on that as kids, so there was always sharp axes, saws. The value of sharp tools was always there, and for whatever reason, I honed in on cutlery. I like all things sharp, though. Even a chip of stone, being out here in the Northwest, you sometimes encounter obsidian. That turns me on almost as much as the fanciest of knives. Just, I like sharp stuff. But I got into making my own knives just basically because I couldn't afford all the stuff I wanted. And it's far easier to make knives than imagine money that's not going to show up. So that allowed me to get into the knives. And then I met some knife makers early on. When I was about 17, I met a very famous man, Jim Schmidt. And he makes high-end, high-art knives. He's passed away now, but he showed me how to make what I considered magic knives. And that is, at the time, this would have been late 80s, the hype in the magazines was for indestructible knives. And he showed me how to make indestructible knives. Really, for me, I don't find it that hard. It is a lot of technical jargon that can go into it. But basically, start off with a good steel, add a good heat treat to it, and make a solid handle on it. And most of your steels will support the duties of a hard use knife. There's few exceptions to that where you can get stuff that's glass hard and it'll shatter being batoned or something like that. But
Yeah, why don't you give me a tour of your knives?
okay, so this is some of the stuff that I've made. I don't really have too many models per se. I do a lot of different designs. I kind of consider myself more of a designer than a maker because I don't have a lot of high output. But this first big one here, this is a big recurve bolo design based off a Jest bolo that I make. But I used some Becker knife and tool scales made by K-Bar. I made the knife and bolted the handles on there just to make for a quick manufacture of the knife for camping. And the seal on most of these, let's see, this one, this one, this one, this one are all 5160. This one here in the thinner material at 1/8 inch thick is 1095, and then the small neck knife is 154 cm stainless steel. But this one here is my latest and greatest bushcraft design. I've got really contoured handles, and then I break the edges on the spine so that when you're choked up with your thumb, you won't cut your thumb. But forward of that area, where you're into the hardened blade, because I differentially heat treat everything, you can use the spine for scraping a fire steel. And the bevel on this one is semi-Scandi ground. It has a slight bevel at it at the very edge, but it's a nice compromise between tough and a nice thin edge for carving. So it's kind of a nice do-it-all design, and I'm really liking it. This one here, as most of these are, it's rough finished because it's more of a proto and a beater, and I can't see going a whole lot of time into making my own personal knives too pretty. This one here is a Kephart prototype that I made, and I based the handle contours off the actual known Kephart knife design owned by Ethan Becker. And you'll notice it's actually sculpted this way, whereas for years people have seen pictures of these and they've gotten the profile correct, but not the contouring. And that just allows you to have basically a larger guard to keep your hand back on the handle while giving you full blade to use. Because one thing Ethan and I kind of agree on is we don't really love choils. You shouldn't have to choke up on a smaller knife like this. Now it can be important on a larger knife because you want to change the balance of the knife. But on something, this one here just is about a 5-inch knife. You shouldn't need to choke up on that. So you bring the most usable edge back towards the handle, and then with the sculpting and a little bit of a nub and guard here, your hand is secure on that blade and you're not going to go forward of it. But it's a nice traditional design, and I'm hoping to make a few more of them and possibly do a 4-inch version also.
How famous is this knife design?
Is in the camping survival world, it's pretty much Excalibur. Possibly if somebody can come up with a Nessmuk knife, that might trump it, but they'd probably be on an even keel. And no one's ever produced Nessmuk's actual knife other than the one drawing that exists in his book. But Kephart actually had some made, and they probably went to people who actually used them and used them up and didn't save them. They probably didn't last past a couple of generations. You know, there's grandpa's knife and kids get a hold of it, things disappear and the history gets forgotten. So it's just one of those rare things that
What time period was that?
I do believe it's right around 1900, and I could be wrong on that because I'm me.
Was it pretty unusual that you were able to get your hands on something like that or look at something like that?
Very unusual. The other known Kephart knife is in a museum. No one is allowed to touch that. So Ethan getting hold of this one and being so generous to share that experience with so many makers and just knife fans was phenomenal. You know, this is not everybody can drive a Lamborghini, but we've all seen them in magazines. This was like your friend buys the best Lamborghini and hands you the keys and says, take a spin. You know, now no one that I know of actually cut with a knife, but just to get it in your hands is something just amazing. You know, it's an experience. You know, it's quite honestly a legendary knife design. You know, and it's all practical use. The original was walnut scales. Mine is black micarta because I like a more durable handle material, but the black walnut for an over 100-year-old knife was still just as stable as the day it was put on. And then down here I have a more traditional bushcraft style knife. Again, very roughly finished, but this one has a true Scandi grind on it. Carves like no tomorrow. And my lines are not perfect on this. I don't use jigs on these. Also, this is not something I would release as a first, but just for a test run for my own use, it's been working pretty good this summer. And you can see I've sparked some fire steels on it and done a lot of carving with it. It's been a fun knife this year. And the handle is just some old G10 that I had. It's actually black and maroon, but horrible color. And then brass pins swaged over. And then this little guy here is a little neck knife design that I came up with, a little clip point. I make these very rarely, but this is a 154 cm and heat treated by MetTech in Clackamas, Oregon. But it's just a little flat ground little clip point. But I left the clip with a 90 degree so you can use that for a fire steel, which actually I put a Boy Scout fire steel in under a Ranger band on the sheath. So kind of if you're worst case scenario, you're down to it, you've still got a knife and a fire source. Although I usually have a full bag of knives, so that doesn't happen. And then this one here is my Brute. Just a brutish knife. It's not really the name of it. But this one I built as a camp knife and a throwing knife. And it's been put away wet a couple of times, hence the fingerprints and a little bit of rust. But it actually is a pretty good thrower, and I've got it sharpened to where it will do some cutting. Doesn't hold the best edge because, well, when it gets thrown, they hit the dirt. Normal stuff for dirt on steel happens, but it's easily sharpened out. I've got this one tempered a little bit softer than normal just so it's easier to sharpen. But again, I've got some nicely contoured scales because I like the feel of the knife. And you want to have a little bit of contour to whatever your knife handle is, because you'll notice the hand is not flat. So you want to round off your corners, get a little palm swell in there. Even a little bit helps a lot with your grip, and that way you can transition your grips back and forth for whatever cutting you're doing. And then the other thing I think I should be known for, the only things I like sharp on a knife are sharp edges. Your cutting edges or scraping edges. The back here where your thumb's gonna encounter contact, or here where your fingers come up, those shouldn't be sharp. It sells a lot of knives, and people do like crisp lines on collecting knives, but they don't feel good after extended use. And whether that extended use is survival or just carving hot dog sticks, you don't want to wear out your fingers because your knife is sharp in places it doesn't need to be. That's one of the things I strive for. And it doesn't always make for the best of lines, but it's something that makes better tools. You want a comfortable hammer handle if you're a craftsman. And it's the same with your knife. It should fit your hand as best as possible, without causing you any undue pain or discomfort. Because if it's uncomfortable, you don't want to use it.
Prototype?
Yeah, about 4 of them.
And
Ready?
It's been
Yep.
abused.
But anyway, this here is John's personal 4-inch SAR search and rescue knife, and you can see he's used it a few times. This used to be very dull black, or not black, but like almost dirt colored, and he's worn it to a nice polished, almost maroon brown now. But it's a knife we designed, mostly John's ideas, and we went through about 4 different prototypes. I think 1 or 2 of them had finger grooves, and 1 or 2 of them didn't.
Right.
And we like the finger groove, which on a knife this size, a finger groove makes sense. We did 1 or 2 that were a little bit larger, and the finger groove really puts a lot of smack when you get into chopping. But this is a nice thick knife. You can see it's been batoned a few times, and for a compact size knife, pretty much anybody in like a search and rescue unit, you're not going to catch too much flack from your higher ups for being Rambos out there. Although bigger knives will do the job more efficiently. But this is easy to carry, but still tough enough to do big knife chores. it's a pretty decent replacement for a larger knife, but yet still small enough to do fine cutting and food prep and all kinds of, especially even work for the search and rescue around other people. Occasionally you have to cut off clothing and things like that, and you really don't want to be out there with an 8-inch Bowie or 10-inch doing that. So this makes a little more sense, and yeah, you put this one through hell. Proud of you. But you can find my knives mainly at bladeforums.com or in my subforum at Bladeforums under Siegle Knives. And then I also have a website at siegleknives.com.
That's the one I'll use for you.
Well, you got to do one of those every now and then just to reset the blade on the hat.
Trying to make me feel better. Wow, through the road.